For hundreds of years, educated people believed that some geese were not born from eggs at all. They grew on trees. Welcome to the channel where stick figures explain the strangest things humans ever genuinely believed about the world around them. These were not jokes or fairy tales. Smart people, scholars, and priests wrote these ideas down and defended them for centuries. So back to those geese. Medieval Europeans were puzzled because nobody ever seemed to find the nests or eggs of certain geese. They noticed barnacles on driftwood looked vaguely like little goose heads on stalks. So they connected two completely unrelated things. The conclusion was obvious to them. These geese clearly hatched out of barnacles, growing from shells stuck to wood and trees. This was surprisingly convenient. Since the goose supposedly grew like a plant or shellfish, some people ate it on days meat was banned. We now call them barnacle geese, and they simply migrate to breed far north, where no medieval European ever followed them. If geese could grow on trees, where did mice come from? People had an answer for that too, and it was just as wrong. For most of history, people believed living creatures could appear out of non-living stuff. They called this spontaneous generation. One famous recipe claimed you could make mice by leaving dirty rags and wheat in an open jar for a few weeks. Maggots on rotting meat seemed like proof. People watched meat go bad and saw maggots appear, so the meat must be creating them. Nobody thought to ask where the flies came in. The idea that flies laid invisible eggs felt far less obvious than meat just spawning bugs. It took careful experiments with covered jars to finally prove it. Cover the meat, block the flies, and no maggots ever appear. Speaking of things that mysteriously vanish, people were baffled every winter when the swallows disappeared. So they invented a theory. Many naturalists genuinely believed that swallows spent the entire winter hibernating underwater, buried in the mud at the bottom of ponds. Respected thinkers wrote that fishermen sometimes pulled up clumps of sleeping swallows in their nets, all tangled together in the muck. The idea hung on for ages, partly because the truth sounded even crazier. These tiny birds were actually flying thousands of miles. It seems we will believe almost anything before we believe a bird that small could cross the entire world twice a year. Birds were confusing, but the human body was a total mystery. For 2,000 years, people thought you were full of 4 liquids. These were the 4 humors. Blood, phlegm, and 2 kinds of bile were thought to control your entire health and personality. Too much of one humor supposedly made you sick or moody. An angry person simply had an unfortunate overflow of hot, fiery bile. Your mood, your fevers, even your love life were all blamed on these 4 fluids sloshing out of their proper balance. This theory shaped how people understood themselves for longer than almost any idea in history, and every bit of it was wrong. If the body was a mystery, disease was terrifying. Before germs were known, people thought sickness floated through the air as a smell. They called it miasma, or bad air. Foul-smelling mists from swamps and rotting waste were believed to literally carry plague and fever. To survive an outbreak, some people carried bunches of sweet flowers, hoping that pleasant smells could block the deadly, stinking air. Plague doctors even wore long-beaked masks stuffed with herbs, convinced the perfume inside would filter out the dangerous foul vapors. They were chasing the wrong villain entirely. The real killers were tiny germs, often spread by the fleas and rats nobody suspected. When it came to women's health, the theories got even stranger. Doctors believed a woman's womb could wander around inside her body. Ancient physicians taught that the womb roamed freely, drifting up toward the chest or throat and causing all sorts of trouble. They blamed this wandering organ for dizziness, anxiety, and fainting, lumping countless unrelated symptoms under one fashionable diagnosis. Their cures were as odd as the theory. Doctors waved pleasant scents low and foul scents high, trying to lure the womb back down. This idea lingered for over 2,000 years, blaming a calm, perfectly stationary organ for a long list of completely separate problems. People misread their bodies, and they misread the sky just as badly. A comet was not a wonder. It was a warning of doom. Across the world, a comet meant something terrible was coming. The death of a king, a lost war, a plague, or a great disaster. Eclipses were even scarier. When the sun vanished in the middle of the day, people were certain the world might be ending right then. Some cultures believed a giant beast was swallowing the sun, so crowds banged drums and shouted to scare the creature into spitting it back. And it always seemed to work, because the eclipse ended on its own. Nothing reassures a crowd quite like a problem that fixes itself. We now know comets and eclipses are just clockwork. But for most of history, Every one of them felt like a personal threat from the heavens. The sky was frightening, and so was lightning. Long before electricity, people were sure that a lightning bolt was a god expressing rage. When lightning struck a house or a tree, it was read as punishment, a sign the heavens were furious about something someone had done. Ringing church bells during storms was thought to drive the danger away, so people climbed the towers to ring them as the storm raged. This was a genuinely terrible plan. The tallest object around in a thunderstorm with a person standing in it. Bell ringers were struck constantly. It turned out the answer was a simple metal rod on the roof, quietly guiding the bolt safely into the ground. No anger required. Storms had villains, and so did the sick. When a baby fell mysteriously ill, some families became convinced it was not really their baby. Across folklore, people believed in changelings. The idea that fairies had stolen the healthy child and left a sickly fake in its place. It was a heartbreaking way to explain illness and disability. A child who changed, weakened, or behaved differently could be branded a fairy imposter. Some of the supposed remedies for sending the fairy back were genuinely cruel, and real children were harmed because of this belief. It is a dark reminder that these beliefs had real victims. When you cannot explain why a child is suffering, fear can become dangerous. Let us swing back to something lighter and tastier. For a while, well-off Europeans were genuinely convinced that the tomato was deadly poison. When tomatoes arrived in Europe, they looked suspiciously like other plants people knew to be toxic, so everyone assumed the worst. Wealthy diners kept getting sick after eating them, which seemed to confirm the danger. People nicknamed the tomato the poison apple. The real culprit was the dinnerware. The rich used pewter plates high in lead, and the acidic tomato pulled that lead right into the food. Poorer people who ate from wooden plates were perfectly fine. The tomato was innocent. The fancy tableware was quietly doing the poisoning. It took years for the tomato to clear its name. Today, it is everywhere, having survived one of history's silliest cases of mistaken identity. If a tomato could be misjudged, so could the entire universe. For most of history, people were certain that everything revolved around us. The Earth sat motionless at the center, and the sun, moon, and stars all politely circled around it. It seemed completely obvious, and honestly, who could blame them? The ground feels perfectly still, and the sun visibly rises and sets, marching across the sky every day. The trouble was the planets, which kept wandering backward in loops. To save the theory, astronomers drew dizzying circles within circles within circles. The real answer was almost insultingly simple. We are not the center of anything. The Earth is just a planet quietly circling the sun. Suggesting this got people into serious trouble for a while, because moving the Earth out of the center felt like an insult to everything. If we got our place in space so wrong, imagine how wrong sailors got the oceans, where almost nobody could check the stories. Sailors came home with tales of monsters, and people believed them. The seas were thought to be crawling with enormous, ship-eating beasts. Mapmakers drew these creatures right onto their charts, filling the unknown stretches of ocean with serpents, krakens, and grinning sea dragons. Some of these tales came from real animals, glimpsed badly. A giant squid or a whale, half seen in rough seas, can easily become a monster. Others were pure exaggeration, growing taller with every retelling in every harbor tavern. A big fish becomes a beast that could swallow a fleet. When the map is mostly blank, the imagination rushes in to fill it. And nothing fills an empty ocean quite like a hungry, made-up dragon. Now, it is easy to laugh, but every one of these beliefs was someone's best honest guess with the information they actually had. They did not have microscopes, telescopes, or the slow, patient work of testing ideas. They had patterns, fear, and a strong need to explain things. And that is the real lesson. A wrong answer often feels exactly as obvious and certain as a right one, right up until someone checks, which makes you wonder what we believe right now, with total confidence that people will find absolutely hilarious a few centuries from now. So remember the geese, the ones that supposedly grew on trees because nobody could find their nests. A neat, confident, completely wrong little story. Turns out the truth, geese flying off to breed in the far north, was actually stranger and more impressive than the fairy tale ever was. If watching stick figures explain humanity's weirdest ideas was your kind of fun, hit subscribe so more strange history can grow on this channel. And tell us down in the comments which of these you simply cannot believe people genuinely thought was real. We honestly cannot pick just one.